sometimes I think people get caught in this feeling that they need to understand everything. But I often just slow myself down and go, well, all that needs to happen is, will AI provide the opportunity for like 3 or 4 exceptional companies to exist? And honestly, that's what gets me excited.
In 1955, 4 American academics applied for funding to study a new discipline. To secure the grant, they coined a new term, artificial intelligence. The gambit worked, and the following summer they hosted a workshop at Dartmouth College, New Hampshire. With just a $7,500 budget and a 2-month deadline, they sought to make significant headway. Their goal? Puzzle out how to make machines use language, form abstractions, and solve problems previously reserved for humans. Well, today, what we now call generative AI is finally living up to that promise. And one of the leading companies, Anthropic, has named its models after one of the workshop's organisers, Claude Shannon. I asked its Claude chatbot how much 70 years of AI research had cost. It told me $2 trillion, adding that most of that investment had come in the last 5 years. Whatever the accuracy of that estimate, it clearly suggests that the most significant returns still lie ahead. Welcome to Short Briefings on Long-Term Thinking. I'm Leo Kellion, and in this episode I'm joined by Carl McEnery, an investment manager in our long-term global growth team. You'll hear his thoughts on where AI is leading us and which companies could be among its chief beneficiaries. But before we begin, a quick reminder. As with all investments, your capital's at risk and your income is not guaranteed. Kyle, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Carl, I'd like you to introduce yourself to our listeners before we delve into AI. So can you start by telling us a little bit about what you did before you came to Baillie Gifford and then what made you decide to join?
Yeah, sure. So before I joined Baillie Gifford, I was in academia. I was studying physics. So my PhD was in quantum mechanics, like specifically like quantum information or quantum computing. I'd realized that, academia isn't really what I wanted to do long term, having had up to that point, a lifelong love affair with physics. And I came across Baillie Gifford, and what really stood out to me was this idea that here was a group of people who were genuinely interested in understanding how the world worked, genuinely curious, and it really stood out to me. So I joined, and I found out that actually my path was quite similar to a lot of my colleagues in that we tend to take people who didn't really know that investing or finance was for them.
And so you became an investment manager, and I believe you then headed up a team that looked into how you could use AI to enhance the investment process and in time actually make the investment decisions itself. Can you just tell us a little bit about that project and what happened to it?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. By the end of my second year, I started thinking quite a lot about AI, or at the time it was kind of known more as machine learning. So as I mentioned, I was a physicist, and what you tend to find with physicists is that we're kind of jack of all trades. We know how to code, we know a bit about maths, we can kind of throw our hands to a bunch of different technologies, which tends to mean we follow what technologies are hot. And I was noticing that all of my friends in academia were suddenly leaving to become data scientists, machine learning engineers. So I was like, okay, what's going on here? I mean, I was only, fresh into the job at this point. So naively, I thought, okay, investing, this is really just information processing. AI, machine learning could be quite important. Anyway, to cut a long story short, I pitched to some of our partners here at Baillie Gifford, this idea that, hey, maybe we should look at this. I thought was quite interesting was I was really pushing on an open door. It's worth remembering that this was around 2016. At this point, we'd had a strong kind of history of investing in a bunch of the largest tech companies. So I think we knew that AI was a thing that was coming. I was empowered very early on to get together a team of people. We ended up having 6 people, myself from the investment side, as well as 5, machine learning engineers. They like to have different names. And we, as I said, we went after this problem of like, okay, how can AI be used to make us better long-term investors? So initially we started with this idea of like, we're going to augment people. We're going to create tools that use machine learning. So, if people tell us they like certain stocks, we'll give them other examples of stocks they may like. But we actually pivoted away from that quite quickly after a year. Because what we found out, and this is an important thing when it comes to all technologies, is the technological challenge of helping other people was easier than like full automation, but actually we'd underestimated the human cultural challenge, right? I mean, we had teams that had very long-standing processes. It was actually quite hard to push machine learning models into what they did. So what we ended up doing was then moving to a fully automated endeavor where we tried to create a long-term investment strategy that was end-to-end systematic. So we had machine learning algorithms that were learning from history and trying to forecast the future. And then we were tying that in with kind of systematic portfolio allocation to create portfolios. It took us about 2 years to build this. We were doing a 5-year investment horizon. And then we had it internally seeded by the company because in essence, that's how we do R&D, right? We want to see if this is something that we think could be good before we even remotely consider talking to clients about it.
So that's using the company's own money.
This is using the company's own money. Exactly right. And we ran that for a couple of years. But by the end of 2022, which was, as we'll get to, a relatively pivotal time in terms of AI, I approached some of the senior partners and said, I think we should stop this, which at the time was kind of mad, right? Because this is exactly GPT time. But I mean, to keep it brief, there was roughly 2 reasons why I felt like this particular project was something that it was probably worth stopping and considering what else we should be doing. First of all, what we were trying to do was limited, right? So I mentioned that we were doing forecasting. We were using machine learning to learn from the past to forecast the future. But when you do, there's only a certain amount of historic data out there, right? The further back you go in time, the more sparse data gets. And really machine learning is all about, and we're seeing this with cutting edge of today, it's more data means bigger models, smarter models. Whereas when you go long-term forecasting, you kind of have less data, which meant we had less sophisticated models. And the first problem I had was I felt like what we were creating was actually is limited. I looked at some of the other Baillie, Gifford, the human-based funds. I was like, this isn't as nuanced or as interesting as those. Neither are we as sophisticated as the hedge funds. So it's like, well, what's our point of difference here? The second one is related to ChatGPT coming out, right? This was in and around the point that GPT-3 came out. And even like as I was making the decision, GPT-4 was just about coming out as well. And I thought, hold on a second. GPT is in essence felt like a generalized intelligence that was done, its format was a chatbot. Oh, and it was on everyone's phone. So I was like, well, it's in everyone's pocket already. The distribution problem has been solved. And personally, I thought of it from my point of view, and I was like, the best version of me is actually probably using this AI myself as an investor. So yeah, between those 2 reasons, I thought, you know what? I think we should stop this. It kind of felt of the last paradigm, not the future. So yeah, I ended up coming back to do more traditional investment work. But I think the important thing to note is that project has pollinated other stuff. The people who were working on that for 6 years have gone on to do different things. And I think what we've seen is that the understanding of AI has propagated much more widely within the company as a result.
So ChatGPT coming out and the GPT models beneath it were a kind of wake-up moment for you.
Yeah.
In the sense it was a wake-up moment for lots of people because it got widely adopted very quickly. Can you just give us a sense what it was about ChatGPT that really made it such a pivotal moment?
Sometimes when you're working in the weeds, you can miss what's actually happening, right? I was quite downbeat on natural language processing, which is in essence what this is, with the ability to AI to interact via natural language. Because I was seeing models, in 2020 and 2021 that I thought were pretty crap, but actually what's happening is that they were getting really good. And yeah, so why was there a ChatGPT moment? I think there's 2 things. One is the fact that GPT was it was the distribution. Everyone had their hands on it and could play with it, which was really interesting. And then it kind of had this viral effect. I mean, I think it was when GPT-3 came out, we were all doing sonnets and haikus. I certainly remember talking to all my friends and saying, hey, this is kind of cool. But machine learning before this was about models. The most impressive things were recommendation systems that were in Netflix or Facebook. This was something that we could all really understand. You're just talking to something. And then what I'd say, GPT-3 was good, but then when GPT-4 came out, I think that was a step change for me in particular. I think for other people. I was
why?
Well, it's just so smart. I understood that what was happening with these models is that it was just something that had been trained to figure out the next portion of a word, the next token, I could not believe that process, which I, had been grinding away on in different ways, could produce something where you could have a conversation. The big moment for me was I was like, okay, I want to talk to the thing about something I know quite well. I said, could you ask me 5 questions of increasing difficulty about quantum mechanics and give me feedback on all the answers? The feedback it gave me was amazing. And it really felt like quite an interactive experience. But the thing that blew my mind was how well it spaced the difficulty. And it was more of a gut thing. I was like, this feels right. And I think that was something that, for me, spoke just proper intelligence underneath it.
And then if you bring things up to date, these models have got even more advanced. We're on GPT-5 now. We've got Claude, we've got Gemini, and a number of other models. And I
think we underappreciate how much they've actually changed, to be honest. I think we've normalized to it.
Right. And not only are these chatbots getting better, but we're starting to see agentic AI, these things go off into the digital world and do tasks autonomously for us. It must feel to a lot of the listeners, and certainly to me, like the ground's moving beneath our feet. But for you as an investor, with your task of trying to find the most exceptional companies out there, how does it change your thinking about doing that task?
Well, first of all, it makes me very excited, right? When I think about AI, I think about a paradigm change, right? I think, and here's the operative word, change. And I think change is one of the most interesting things that can happen to a growth investor, right? Because change suggests that there'll be opportunities. And really, if you boil down what we're trying to do is, we're trying to find those few exceptional companies that maybe they're extremely small or don't exist today, but in 10 years' time are going to be enormous. Change provides great opportunity for them. So yes, it does feel like the ground is moving beneath our feet and there's lots going on. And sometimes I think people get caught in this feeling like they need to understand everything. But I often just slow myself down and go, well, all that needs to happen is, will AI provide the opportunity for 3 or 4 exceptional companies to exist? And honestly, that's what gets me excited.
So let's discuss some of those companies, starting with Anthropic. Regular listeners to this podcast will have heard your colleague, Robert Natzler from the private companies team, discussing how several of our portfolios invested in the firm in August 2025, after we became convinced about the scale of the opportunity for its coding tools. But for listeners who are a little less familiar with the firm, can you just give us an idea about the potential scale of growth that the firm's got ahead of it? Because it's not just about helping developers write programming, is it?
Sure. So let's just start with the basics, right? That at the moment, certainly on the Western side of things, there's roughly 4 companies that are able to produce what we say is state-of-the-art models. So this is Anthropic, OpenAI, Google, and xAI. They're called foundation models, right? And at the moment, we could consider them like forming a new intelligence layer in the economy. I will stress, though, it's important, we don't know where all this is going yet, but right now it looks like these companies are providing intelligence that can be used in so many different ways, right? Intelligence that's, equivalent or better than a human that can scale in the way that a machine can. But now specifically going back to Anthropic, each of the companies has their own flavor of what they're trying to do, right? And I think the thing that stands out for Anthropic is their focus on enterprise.
Enterprise, you mean business customers?
Yes, that's right. It's worth noting that Anthropic's kind of founding principle is very much about AI safety. They feel very strongly about creating AI that is understandable, that is trustworthy. They are an early spin-off from OpenAI because there was a kind of disagreement about what direction to take long term. But that has kind of come back to this idea that they're very well suited to the enterprise. So you're right. Coding is probably the first killer app of the AI era. I'm sure there'll be lots more. But yes, it goes beyond that. It goes beyond all the different ways that intelligence can be used in the enterprise, in the economy. So I was speaking to Anthropic in San Francisco a couple of weeks ago, and they were telling us about the customers they're winning. And it's right across the economy. It's in financials and banks. It's in healthcare companies. It's with cybersecurity. And what was really striking was that the use cases they're talking about aren't just like simple generic things that would be the same across all the company. Each one was actually quite specialist to that industry. You know, they're really working hard on figuring out how to apply this intelligence to solve like really interesting specialist knowledge.
Can you give me an example?
Okay, so for example, with the banks, with AIG, it's like know your customer. It's quite an important and complex process. So it's a huge opportunity ahead for that company.
And it's sometimes described as being a race between these different labs and indeed between different countries, particularly the US and China. What do you make of this idea that whoever manages to match or even surpass humans in all their different capabilities with their models might take the whole market, that in some way it's winner takes all?
I'm not sure I believe that will be the way, but like let's talk about why people believe that, what the mechanism is. In essence, it's a belief in a potential tipping point, right, where an AI gets so good that it can improve itself very quickly. So a lot of people in Silicon Valley are very interested in this idea of self-improving AI. If you actually look at all the releases, nearly always in the technical documentation, they measure how good the AI is at coding, but coding for improving AI. Let's say a company gets to a certain threshold 3 months ahead of other ones, that you'll have some kind of runaway effect, whereas it in essence will be able to translate that 3 months into an enormous lead because AI moves very quickly. It's kind of like thinking about an exponential. Now that might happen, but what we're seeing at the moment, that hasn't happened yet. What we're seeing so far is that, you know, a couple of companies have managed to get to the point of being able to create these models, and that requires know-how, but also the compute and the ability to build out that infrastructure. But we haven't seen any of them like massively pull away. But what I'd say to listeners, the important thing is it's about kind of being open-minded, right? Because I feel like what I've seen in the discourse around AI is that people are very reactive to the current signal. I think at the minute when they see companies staying relatively close to each other, you know, that signal that maybe none of them will pull away, which might be right, but that's not necessarily the case. It's this idea of people not being able to deal with like non-linearities. Things have been this way. They've all stuck together, so that will be the same way forever. It might not. Again, I will be on the fence. I don't know. Right now, it seems less likely that one of them is going to pull away, but let's see.
And you talk about signal. I know one of the signals that Baillie Gifford looks for as to what companies might become durable is the leadership of those companies. You've spent time speaking to Dario Amodei, the CEO of Anthropic, and some of the leaders of the other AI labs. Can you tell me what your key takeaways are from those meetings?
Sure. First of all, it's a real privilege to be able to spend time with these people because of our clients and the fact that we, you know, manage money on their behalf. We are in the position to speak with these people, and just to put a fine point on it, the thing that we do have to do is be long-term, like facilitate these really interesting conversations, because I do think that it's something that's very helpful all around. But in terms of what I've learned, Dario is very thoughtful about how he thinks the future is going to go. He is a huge believer in the scaling laws.
Just explain what those are.
Sure. This is this idea that AI gets smarter purely by making the models bigger. And really, when I say make the models bigger, it's you need more computers to train them and you throw more data into them. This is crucial, right? Because we're getting technological improvement through a recipe that's known and predictable. And I think that is partly what spurred on quite a lot of the investment, right? Is that people actually have a decent bit of evidence. I mean, nothing's ever like fully certain that if they spend more money on compute, if they gather more data, they will have models that are smarter, have potentially really interesting emergent abilities. So that's really important, as opposed to the AI will get smarter if we come up with a really interesting new architecture or some scientific breakthrough that is as of yet unknown. He's been a strong believer of that even in his early days at OpenAI, and he's still a believer of that today. It's super interesting to get his insight onto these things.
So, Carl, you talked about the ever-increasing demand for computation, and that works to the favor of Nvidia, which dominates the market in these AI accelerator chips. Baillie Gifford's been an investor in the company since 2016, and the stock's had quite a run since then. So what's the investment case to keep it as a holding at this point?
I have fond memories of this. I remember very early on in my time at Baillie Gifford, I think just before I started the AI project, I was at an AI conference down in London. I remember a lot of it was sponsored by Nvidia, and there was a professor there, but he was a Cambridge professor who was also working with Amazon. And I remember at the end of his speech, he was like, and thank you to Nvidia because machine learning is dead without them. So it was kind of intriguing, you could see that in hindsight that it was crucial. And also just back to this point about, yes, we were invested in them in 2016, but it's important to note that we didn't know that AI was going to be like what it is today. I think it's crucial to kind of know that with all the investments, right? That, we had an inkling that this could happen, but we didn't know. And we were probably talking just as much about like Bitcoin mining back then. But in terms of Nvidia today, I probably think about it through maybe like three kind of lenses. One, what do I think about the underlying demand, right? Do I think there'll be more need for compute and AI? And I think about Jevons paradox, this idea that will AI demand saturate, or will, as we get cheaper AI and more AI, do we just want more and more and more? I'd probably be biased to suggest that I think we'll be very greedy and we'll want more. And then you think about, well, look, Nvidia it's still the standard, right? With its CUDA software, it has the kind of the standard ecosystem that everybody uses, which I still think puts in a very interesting position.
And CUDA's programming, helping people program specifically for Nvidia.
Yeah. In essence, it allows people to get the best out of the hardware, which is something that's often misunderstood. And also, Nvidia spent an awful lot of investment in terms of building out the capabilities of CUDA extremely widely. Basically, what you find with Nvidia is that like, when you want to do something, you can kind of just do it. And because they're so linked with all the labs, they tend to build in functionality that you don't realize you needed it, but they're kind of ahead of the curve. But the last thing I'd point out as well is that, we talked about like founders and how important they can be. This is something that Baillie Gifford thinks about a lot. You've got Jensen, and I think he provides, two really interesting like amplifying effects on top of what I've just said. One is I think he helps facilitate Nvidia being very nimble despite their enormous size. Considering how big this company is, they are executing like incredibly fast. I think they're getting down to like year frequency in terms of releasing these new chips. Over the course of 6 years, Nvidia improved the efficiency of the amount of AI tokens per joule of energy, which, by the way, is crucial, right? Because that is the big bottleneck, by something like 42,500 times. It's amazing what they're doing every year to improve it. But then also, and this is important when you think about the long term, Jensen seems to have this really like interesting knack of like positioning Nvidia into like places that might work out well for it. Like, remember, this was a gaming chip company, right? And he kind of figured out like, maybe this ML thing is something that's important. It's interesting for Bitcoins.
ML, machine learning.
Machine learning, AI. Thank you. And then, we've got, he's been seeding this idea of robotics for an extremely long time, which, again, maybe that'll be really good. And even further out, he's talking about quantum computing. So I think the underlying demand is still really interesting and strong. I mean, competition is heating up, but this is still like the standard dominant ecosystem. And yeah, you've got a founder there who can kind of position the company in really interesting ways and ensure execution is still strong. So I think when you look at those factors, again, without knowing exactly what's going to happen in 5 years, that's still a compelling couple of factors to hold the company.
Okay, Carl, I want to move on to some of your other portfolio companies that maybe aren't the foundational AI companies that are putting it to use. So can you give me an example of a company that's maybe got an AI-driven product that it's putting into its customers' hands and presents the company with a transformational growth opportunity?
Sure, I will. But I think it's really great, moving off foundational models, because kind of to reassert my point, AI is going to be everywhere and it's going to create a lot of change. So one company I'd point out, one that we invest in is Roblox. Simply put, Roblox is a gaming company, right? But another way you could look at it is like as the kind of early stages of the metaverse. It is the users who build the games that other people play, and it's almost like a mini kind of ecosystem. Roblox is kind of defined by its kind of crappy, kind of blocky graphics, right? If I'm sure if any of our listeners have kids, they'll know all about Roblox. But what's really interesting is that For Roblox, the key is for it to be as simple as possible for its users to create games, right? And they've been on this road for a very long time in terms of trying to like make this world, this metaverse exist. And now with AI, they're actually training their own foundation model on their own data, the gaming data, which allows its users to much more easily create items within games, characters, gameplay itself. Now, this is still in the early stages, but it will just get better and better. And there's an example of a company that's had a vision that has been working towards for decades already. And here comes this technology, and this could unlock the next stage. Again, I was speaking to the founder in November in their HQ, and he was talking to us about this idea that AI is going to allow lucid gameplay.
What does that
mean? Like lucid dreaming gameplay. In essence, it's this idea that users can create games in real time on the fly while people are playing with them. So he gave this example of like a user creates this game in a coliseum, but then all of a sudden it changes into a castle on a whim. This is the type of thing that will be possible, and it's kind of just interesting to see how they will use this technology to create something that could be enormous, that could be something truly valuable.
So that's Roblox. Can you give me an example then of a company that's using AI to improve its own operational efficiency?
So a company I call out here is AppLovin, an advertising company. If you're playing a game on your phone, it will help service the advertising of other games too. It's now moving beyond that into e-commerce. But I think the really interesting thing that sets AppLovin apart is just like a unique focus on operational efficiency. It has minimal amount of people needed to make this run, and you see this. Its economics are amazing, and their founder is so focused on basically trying to help scale up every single one of its employees with AI to be the best they can be. And basically his vision is of a company where everyone who works for it is performing at the peak of their level. It can sometimes sound quite negative when you have less people working in a company, but here's a company that feels hungry, it feels really efficient and nimble. It feels like a company that well before its time understands what success looks like for a company in the next era. So I'm very excited about that.
And AppLovin's chief executive, Adam Ferrugi, I think has said that he believes in time many public companies will be able to run with fewer than 100 employees thanks to AI. Now, that will send a shiver down the spines of some of our listeners. But from an investment point of view, what's the benefit of having a chief executive founder who's so radical in his thinking about where this technology could lead us?
It's massive. It's just an enormous leverage point, right? It can't be overstated. It's when you have a founder, you have someone who the buck can stop with. They can say, look, we're going this direction and that's what's happening. I mean, I called it out with Jensen before saying, look, we're going to do it like this. This is what's happening. Let's go. I mean, historically, Elon Musk has been somebody that has done very well at like fighting entropy, fighting bloat. I think that's essential. But yeah, Adam is just someone who is frighteningly driven. Quite inspiring, to be honest with you.
And what other AI themes are you looking at?
You can look at something like Reddit, another company that we invest in. It's not really about the technology at all. But again, it's about what becomes valuable as AI permeates. And Steve Huffman, their founder, has talked about Reddit being the most human place on the internet. The underlying value here is something like there's real communities having proper conversations, right? And that's something that, is likely to become increasingly valuable purely because of what's happening elsewhere, So again, that's different ways of looking at like where value may come from. It's not always just to do with AI.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time on Reddit just trying to work out where AI is going. But at the same time, we're seeing these AI companies train themselves on Reddit. We're seeing them answer users' queries using data that they've taken from Reddit. Is there also a challenge there for the platform that it doesn't get hollowed out by this?
I think it's really important that the founder, Steve, is back running the company, and actually he's got a very good executive team around him. But in terms of hollowing out, well, this is the challenge of running any company, right? Reddit need to balance the fact that what's the value proposition for its users, that is this community, with other opportunities in terms of like both how it advertises, which is probably more crucial to the business case, plus AI. But going specifically onto your point, this idea that you get like passive consumption of Reddit, where people who aren't actually involved, just kind of the information gets taken from them. This is probably the number one thing that Reddit are thinking about. And I was speaking to Steve just a couple of weeks ago, and honestly, that was one of the main things he wanted to talk about, was like, for him, the most important thing is onboarding users. What do I mean by that? Anybody who interacts with Reddit passively, in whatever shape that is, how can you get them potentially involved in Reddit? Going back to founders, he's so knowledgeable and he can speak so eloquently about all the high level stuff going on with AI, but actually he really just cared. He's obsessed with this product. He just really cared about this one small thing that he thought was the crucial lever for his business.
So, Carl, in much of what we've talked about generative AI, we've been talking about the impact of large language models. But when you invest, you're looking to hold a company for 5 to 10 years or longer. So if we look over that time horizon to maybe what comes next, there's a lot of talk about spatial AI, about world models, and about the implications for physical AI. Can you just make sense for our audience what all of that means and how it's influencing your thinking?
So if you think about LLMs, large language models, the idea is that AI learns about the human world via our writings. It turns out through our kind of corpus of texts, because that's all the AI knows, it can actually figure out a huge amount about like our world. But clearly, the next step is to get it to learn about the physical world in terms of like the raw data. You know, rather than just to read about physics, to actually be able to like see how a ball bounces, to like understand these things. Now, this stuff is already happening. So first of all, we start with like images, and then we're moving on to videos. We've got these like multimodal models. And now companies are moving more towards building up, as you said, these world models where they can figure out more about the real world. This problem is actually something that about 6 years ago was getting much more airtime, right? Because, you know, autonomous vehicles were like probably the big AI endeavor, right? Which is all about like this, embodied AI learning from the world. So I think that is absolutely the next leg of things. So we've got autonomous driving. We'd historically invested in Tesla. We now actually invest in a company called Horizon Robotics, which is involved in this from a Chinese perspective. Beyond that, you've then got robotics, humanoid robotics, which is something that really comes at the intersection of both of these trends. I was fortunate enough to be able to speak over the summer with the ex-head of Tesla's Optimus program, which was their humanoid robotics. And it was fascinating just to him just kind of grounding me in the reality of where the data was. You know, still quite a lot of it of training robots is literally an operator will control a robot, manually, and then they'll use that data to train the robot.
So this is what they call imitation learning.
Yeah, it's very low scale, right? And remember that like everything to do with machine learning is you just want to be drowning in data. But then they move on to the next stage, which is they get first-person videos from the internet. And then they want to move to like third-person data. But the big unlock would be simulation, right? Like you basically just like simulate the physics and give it to the robot. This is very, Nvidia are doing a lot of work in this, by the way. This is quite computationally intensive. So actually the hope is that some of these world models that they're building can actually be a cheaper way to provide some of this like simulation data or like synthetic data. And then after that, and maybe in parallel, is actually a focus on science. First of all in healthcare, but also, having AI actually be able to help in scientific endeavors and actually create innovations.
It feels like we could do a whole episode on this topic. We probably should in the future, but I know one of your colleagues, John McDougall, is going to be publishing a paper shortly on physical AI. So we'll update the show notes when that's out to help listeners find it. Carl, as we start to bring things to an end here, I just wonder, it feels to me like you're having to think very deeply about this topic, but at the same time, is it fair to say that you're having to hold your beliefs and predictions quite lightly because things are moving so quickly?
Yeah, no, 100%. It feels like an incredibly noisy time. I try and remain pragmatically optimistic. I think that's what we want to do, like make sure that I understand what's going on, but try and bias myself to what could go right. So I'm very open-minded. I think at a simplistic level, I think things are improving. I think I think the technology is getting better. I believe that people are going to come up with really interesting ways to use it. I think they're already doing that, to be honest with you. Again, I think we have to be humble as to like how that's actually playing out. I want to understand what's going on, but really all I care about is, again, what am I looking for? Like 1, 2, 3 companies that I think, because of this change, could be really interesting to hold on to for the next 10 or 15 years. So, I don't need to know everything about the whole field.
Carl, before I let you go, I always like to finish this podcast by asking my guests what they're reading or have recently finished. So what's new on your bedside table?
So I tend to be, lately I tend to be quite like a fiction reader, especially sci-fi, to kind of wind down. I suppose the last non-fiction book I read, which was unfortunately quite a popular one in the AI circles as well, was Richard Rhodes' The History of the Atomic Bomb, or The History of the Nuclear Bomb.
Why is that relevant to AI?
Oh, okay. Well, this is a slightly separate topic, but I mentioned earlier about ideologies, and people in the AI community tend to be quite good first principle thinkers, and they tend to extrapolate about the dangers of AI. So they often think about themselves often as like the creators of the atomic bomb. What could that unleash? How should they think about what they're building? But I mean, kind of going away from that, I just found it was an incredibly fascinating book, because it started with the discovery of the nucleus, and then it goes all the way to, unfortunately, the dropping of the bomb. But I love reading books like that where you get to stand back and just see the full sweep of history. I think it's very humbling, and it helps you kind of remind you of like all the things that kind of go into play. And again, if you zoom in, a lot of noise happens. So I find that really helps kind of set my brain quite nicely for the job.
Carl, it's been fascinating hearing from you. I hope we can get you back on, because this field's moving so quickly.
Delighted. Thank you so much, Leo.
And I hope you enjoyed this conversation too. If you're interested in reading more about the topic, Kyle and his long-term global growth teammates will publish an article on infinite compute as part of their forthcoming transformation series of papers a little later in the year. And if that's too long to wait, Kyle's colleague, John McDougall, is about to post an article on physical AI to the Baillie Gifford website. Check out the show notes for other reading suggestions and a glossary of some of the terms that cropped up in this episode. And subscribe to Short Briefings via YouTube, Spotify, or any podcast app to be first to know when the next edition's out. But for now, that's it. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to briefing you again soon.